Good morning and welcome to the AutoTalk weekly wrap live. Never really named it. Live today from my sister / Auto Media Group's general manager's dining room. I'm on the road down in Auckland today, a couple of meetings, and weirdly picking up a truck. I'm going to be driving around in a truck. That's a little bit different as opposed to Graham, who now owns a truck.
Yeah, I do actually. Yes. So you're about to experience a truck, and I've already got a truck. We should start the AutoTalk trucking live.
Yes. David, any trucks floating around you?
Only my one tonner.
It's the interesting thing with the truck. So I'm driving the truck to review it for AutoCar. Now, AutoCar doesn't normally do trucks, but we are trying to broaden the content that it does. Now, I'm not saying that we are going to review trucks for the sake of reviewing trucks, but with the launch or with the announcement of the Ford Ranger Super Duty, this kind of argument is raising its head again, is that are utes actually any good at the jobs that some people pitch them as being good for, if that makes sense? Mm-hmm. So just because a ute can carry a ton and it can tow a 3-ton trailer and supposedly have your mates along in a double cam, legally, can it do it all at the same time? B, can it do any of the things actually well? And C, when are you actually better off not buying a ute truck and buying a truck? And it's a debate that's going on a bit in Australia at the moment. There's been a lot of content over there about it. And we want to have a look at it here as to, what is the turning point? When are you better off putting your worker or even yourself in a truck rather than a ute? And the Ford is like having that whole argument at the moment. They're going to be leaning into this argument heavily, I think, with the Super Duty Ranger from the other side. Interesting discussion to have.
You won't say what it is. I mean, and before I say that, there's trucks and there's trucks. So I gather from this, we're not talking about actual trucks, but ute trucks. No, correct?
No. So we're driving a Fuso Canter, but of course there's all sorts of stuff around the things like the Isuzu MPR. The Hino has smaller trucks as well. The import market's big into that smaller segment. Interestingly, we had 2 tradies at our house the other day with 2 trucks at the same time, and we're talking about the various road users, the charges, that kind of thing. And they are that small truck range. They are, some of them are serious workhorses. I think the Canter that we're driving today, you can have it in a gross combined mass situation up over 9.5 tons. But unlike a ute, it can carry a couple of tons on a trailer on the tray and tow a 3.5 ton trailer. Now, it won't do it fast, and you might need a Class 2 license, but that's the interesting thing.
Well, the thing is,
probably the hardest working vehicles in all of the sub 24 ton range. They're the things that actually make people money.
So, my experience, Richard, before I left the MIA, was that the big sellers were what I call the small trucks and the big trucks, and the medium-sized trucks, which is the 12-ton to 15-ton range. They sold steadily, but not great numbers. So the real workhorses were the big the big units, and the small units, the small trucks. And I suspect the answer to your question about when should you be in a truck versus a big, strong ute is, well, what kind of work are you doing and what kind of loads are you doing? So for me, I need a ute. I'm never going to tow more than 3.5 tons. And I'm not going to load the tray up all that much when I've got the caravan on it. You've got stuff in it. It looks full, but it's not heavy. Mm-hmm. So when you go into the likes of the Rams and the Chevrolet utes, you need a Class 2 license anyway to tow when you get over more than 6 tons combined mass.
Well, ironically, most of those Rams aren't actually rated to do that. If you want to carry a load and tow a big trailer, you need to go to a 2500 as opposed to a 1500 because they've kind of segmented those 1500 size utes as pickup trucks as being more of a, lifestyle vehicle.
Yeah. No, you're right. It is the 2500s and those equivalents that will do that. So it's a careful sort of choice about which one that you want, and the 4.5 to 6 ton trucks that have got a combined vehicle mass of up to 9 to 9.5 tons. They are a really good, strong workhorse, and they were selling in relatively strong numbers a couple of years ago. So I'm not surprised that there is this discussion about what are you trying to do with it. And I think that the tradies that are getting into being more than just a house builder, getting into being more of a developer, and there's a lot of that around, they need those units. They need to be able to put a few cubic meters of gravel in the back of the truck and throw a trailer with a whole lot of stuff and arrive at a site. So I suspect you're going to see strong markets for those. And interestingly, that size small truck, there's a lot of work going on in bringing forms of electrification, including fully electric trucks. So it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, I drove recently the new JAC electric one, and that was, I drove an early one. It was a little bit unrefined, but it was an easy 200 plus kilometers out of it. That's interestingly one area where the government is still providing subsidies, because they see that as a place where that light commercial or medium commercial stuff is where they can make gains on CO2 and support business.
And
but yeah, from what
JAC, they market the daylights out of that too. That's one of the strongest. If you look at JAC's marketing, you say, Jack, I'm not too JAC, Jack. They use that as a really strong pitch in all their marketing as well about that rebate.
Yeah. The interesting thing about it, watching the Australian material, that, slightly different rules we're looking at it, is that essentially if you're sending a work crew out every day and they are running around with a fairly low, 2 or 3 people in a ute, a fairly reasonable load of tools on the back, and they tow occasionally, you are probably already crossing over into territories where a truck is potentially your better option. Just on, even though arguably some of those light trucks have lower safety standards than a ute, they generally have dual airbags. A lot of them have AEB and all that kind of stuff now. Watching some of the tests about how a reasonably modest trailer can push around a ute that already has a load in the tray, versus what a truck, what they're saying he does in a truck of similar cost, to be honest. It's worth looking at. It's worth looking at. So yeah. But interestingly, and chatting with some people the other day, the Ranger Super Duty. Well, I think some people have looked at this as being, it's just going to be vanity trucks running around with guys who wanted the bigger, better Ranger. Talking to some people in the Australian industry, there's a lot of people nervous about that truck, in that there's a massive industry around supplying the mining industry with GVM converted Land Cruiser 70s, because they're the only vehicles that will realistically do the job that all of those people are wanting. And they believe that market's just going to get taken. Because the LC70 is getting old and is coming to an end. But a lot of these companies want 5-star safety, which that can't offer. And secondarily, the Super Duty won't need a GVM conversion. And I heard of one person who's one of their companies has an interest in a GVM converting company. And they're sitting there going, maybe it's time to sell the shares and jump the heck out of that. Interesting move.
Whereas me, I've overlooked all the photos and bits and pieces in the Super. I just want one, and I'm not going to tow a trailer, and I don't have builders mix. I just want one. Is that just the sexiest bit of gear I have seen in the truck sector for a very, very,
it's all concept photos at the moment. There's a great concept photo that our designer Alex Schultz did over at AutoTalk. Everything I'm hearing and the spy shots are showing is actually it's going to launch as very much the tradie version, steel tray, all that kind of stuff. The wheels are now confirmed as an 8-stud wheel. So I said to the team on chat this morning, expect a flood of 22-inch wheel options with 8 studs. So proper truck hardware underneath. What if it's going to be Julies at the back? Wouldn't Julies look cool on a Ranger?
Not so good for the West Auckland car park, as I found out with my Ram that I used to own. But let's face it, you don't really care either.
And coming back to the comment you made about trailers pushing utes around, Richard, that's more to do with the electronic braking not being set up properly and people not knowing how to vary the trailer braking ratio to the vehicle trailer braking. It's an education thing. The advantage, though, that the trucks have is that they are slightly heavier, but it's their chassis. Their chassis is so strong because it's a proper ladder chassis, and you can bounce those things around, and they've got durability. So it's a question again of what are you doing, what work do you need to apply it to, and what is the best value for money in terms of capital costs versus running costs versus maintenance costs.
Yes. Yeah. So, and it's going to be an interesting discussion with that market. Ranger, I suspect the Ranger Super Duty won't be the last we see in that segment. I think surely Toyota's going to have to look at that as well. And interesting times all around. Now, one little note I will mention is, in fairness, our discussions last week in regards to Christopher Schwartz from IC Cars. Now, we have actually had a response from Christopher where he has given his side of some elements of that story. Now, we won't be discussing it yet, or nor will we be putting it online immediately. What we are doing is we are working to put together a proper look at it for the next magazine, which will be out in about a week or so's time. We just want to make sure that, because it's a story where there are many legal issues and a lot of people have been hurt or allegedly been hurt, we want to make sure that we deal with it properly and not in a rush. So we are processing through a huge number of complaints about IC Cars, but at the same time, we have that response from IC Cars, and we will be putting some of the other complaints and issues we have to IC Cars, or to Christopher Schwartz. IC Cars is now in liquidation, prior to discussing that story further. Obviously an ongoing interesting story, but we want to make sure we do it properly. Yeah, cool.
I see it's been picked up by stuff as well, Richard.
Yeah, they've picked up some of the tribunal cases, and obviously they picked up some elements of our story as well, which is good. Nice to see when they follow behind us all by about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But we're the only ones really, I think, covering it in any great depth, and that is why we are by far the biggest magazine in the automotive segment. By a factor of a couple of times, according to some online data sources. So stick with AutoTalk for all the good news and bad news and dodgy news. Not in any way linking any of those to what we've just been talking about. Now, let's look at some additional news for this week. We're all tired, so let's not make this into a massive one today, even though we're 16 minutes in and we have been talking about a ute. But it's fun.
Functioning.
Now, I'd like to mention that when we are on the website looking at these stories, don't forget to look at those ads. We've got some amazing supporters on our site. AutoHub, McCulloch's, our sponsors, AdTalk, Nichibo, AutoHub, AutoShore, Vins, Auction Online, Better Finance, Accelerate, Auto Terminal New Zealand, AutoFlip, and many, many more as the pages rotate. We love those guys. They make this all possible. Anyway, Turner shares hit $5 with 3 new Christchurch dealerships underway. Turner's Automotive Group shares crossed the $5 threshold this week as team members inspected one of 3 new dealerships the company is building in Christchurch. Turner's expects to open its first new dealership in Shands Road, Hornby, Christchurch, in March 2025. According to Turner's Automotive Group Chief Executive Todd Hunter, more than 53% of the company's staff are shareholders, and he is pleased that their shareholding has appreciated. Hunter says the next big blue wall, so I'm guessing that's a new marketing term from them, is underway in Christchurch, one of 3 new dealerships the company is developing. A busy time for them. And it's interesting. I was with a guest from Australia over the weekend, from the automotive industry in Australia, and they've been around a while, but they just kind of saw Turners as a dealer group. They had no idea from what they've seen of Turners that there was this auction house underneath it, and that they just assumed it was a used car dealer network. So it shows where the Turners brand has got to. Is this, kind of, I guess it's kind of done what they were setting out to do for quite some time.
It's an interesting company.
Carry on, David.
It's an interesting company, and it's one that my family has had a long association with. when I was just a teenager in the 70s, my father was on the board of Turners and Growers, and they sort of dabbled back in the 70s and early 80s in some of the new vehicle dealerships or distributorships before they then started moving their auction capability into vehicles. And eventually Turners and Growers disappeared altogether as the horticultural market changed. And the only surviving arm of that conglomerate back from its strong days in the 80s and 90s is the vehicle auctions, which they have kept and done really, really well. And it's a company that, I've had an association and knowledge of for about the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you have too, Graham. You're a Turners alum.
Yeah, and you know what? I say to people time and time again that 1989 through to 1994, and as an apprenticeship into the industry, because it kind of really was for me. I'd done stuff in the automotive industry beforehand. It was like the gold medal, I suppose, of getting into the industry, getting to know a lot of different people in all facets of the trade. But if I think about the idea of the shareholders, of 53% of staff being shareholders, so I was one of the first intake of what they called back then profit share. And this was just after, I think, the first foray into the share market, when it had been spun away from Turners and Growers, and then instituted the idea of profit share, where a branch's individual profitability delivered you a dividend check at the end of the year. And I think my first dividend check was about $1,100. Which was no small change at that stage. And so it was the very beginning of the idea of staff buying into the concept of the company's profitability and having a hand in that, and therefore being rewarded for it too. So it's a great concept, I think, that's been taken up by the staff. I congratulate it for them. Funny enough, you know what? There are still people that I know that worked with Turners to this very day that have been there since those sort of heady days of the early 90s, is when Turners sort of got everything going in gear all at once, with the car auctions at that stage, and then the machinery auctions, truck auctions, damaged vehicles. It is now a car retail business that also has an auction element to it. They've turned the model completely on its head, but there is still that element of auctions that go on underpinning it.
Mm-hmm. From a dealer perspective, I mean, this expansion from Turners, should dealers be worried? I mean, if a big blue wall went up 500 meters down Universal Drive from you, I mean, not Universal, is Universal Drive? No, Central Park Drive from you, would you be concerned, or do you think they serve a different part of the market?
A big blue wall. I don't know, it's a big blue wall a couple of Ks away from us. And look, primarily they deal in a different market. So the prime supplier of stock to Turners still appears to be lease, rentals, lease vehicles, New Zealand new stock, that sort of thing. They've got a different structure, different model, a different way they do things. I'm not going to say good, bad, or indifferent. They just do things a bit differently from the way that we do it, for example. And they did have a strong foray into the used vehicle marketplace from Japan, as you know, very, very strong there, which they seem to have pedaled back a little bit on in recent years. So the dealer argument is always that, is it better to be by yourself and have no competition, but therefore no traffic? Or is it better to have a lot of competitors around you and it brings everybody into the area, and therefore you'll get your slice of the pie because there are so many people going past looking everywhere else? So yeah, it keeps you on your toes, but I'd prefer to have the latter. I'd rather have a lot of competition around so that you've at least got people in the area to look at your vehicles.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, Graham, that seems to be the model that appears in every major urban area that I've travelled to around New Zealand. As you see, the car yards are grouped together. There's clumps of them. Certainly here in Lower Hutt, there's 2 clumps. Wellington, there's one major sort of clump. I think that's the model that people rely on.
There's a different reason for that, David. Yeah, and it's to do with property. So the primary reason why dealers group together these days is because the traditional high street model of dealerships is being pushed aside by property values, and dealers are going into the upscale industrial areas where the land is actually zoned accordingly for your business. So, for example, if you take Grey Lynn in Auckland, Grey Lynn is no longer the bastion of used car dealers in particular, all the way down the strip, or Green Lane for that matter. And it's driven as much by the value of the property. So it becomes a much more of a sound financial proposition to move out into the suburbs, the areas like we have, where this is all an industrial area. There's no residential at all. And it's larger, big box sites. The sites themselves are available to have a bigger footprint. You've got the Westgate development that's been done all around retail, no residential. So it makes sense to go where the property actually is both large enough and allows you to develop at the cost structure that works for a dealership.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about that, Graham.
I know you weren't. In terms of grouping.
I talked about grouping, and yes, the locations of the grouping changes over time, and you're right, because of property values and they get pushed out. But for as long as I have known both the new and used car sectors, and it's a very long time, grouping has been a function. And I think it is largely because, and it was the comment I was about to make, is that when people go car buying, you do have a proportion of people who are loyal. You know, buy a Honda, always go to Honda, buy a Toyota, always go to a Toyota. But by far the bulk of people like to shop around. And so they want to be able to have a look at choices and options. And they often sort of drive, park up and go for a walk. There are a group of new vehicle distributors that contract a third-party company to do a loyalty survey for them. And it's kind of interesting when you look at that loyalty survey. It's tended to get smaller. My takeaway, anyway, from the results that I occasionally saw over the years is it's still strong, but gets less and less as people start to look at value and start to look at a whole wide range of other things. And so there's a lot of marketing goes on to try and bring repeat buyers back in, but it's getting harder, as I think people are looking for those bargains. They're looking for a wider range of functionality. They're looking for innovation at a good value point. And grouping all car yards together, I guess, helps some of that. And then there's the online presence, which, Richard, you all know about, in terms of the ability to be able to draw people in. I'm always interested in people who buy online without looking at a vehicle. I like to go and look and touch. I'm very reluctant to buy online, even when I've occasionally used Trade Me to source a vehicle. I tend to go and have a look at it if I can.
Are they still the vehicle? I'm trying to run the right term, but the vehicle disposer of record? I mean, in the past where you had to declare stuff, when lease companies would sell something, they had to get an accurate market view, or similarly with other stuff. You kind of, the default, even the courts would do it. Vehicles would go through Turners because it was the fairest market value way of doing things. I mean, is that still the case now, or do you think Mannheim probably plays more of a role in that? I mean, what's your take on that, Graham? You've played in that market.
I think Mannheim is trying really hard to pitch into the particular market, and so I'll declare my interest here. I'm a Mannheim client. I'm not a Turners client, and one of the reasons why was I found that Turners effectively disbanded their dealer division. And for dealers, one of the things that they want most is knowledge and intelligence. They want the backstop of somebody else that speaks the language, that knows the trade, particularly if you're pricing stock on the button when it comes to trades, or you're looking to clear some stock or move some stock. You want to talk to somebody that understands what your business needs and how the industry is currently working, because they're also talking to other dealers. And I gather by design, at one point, Turners decided to dissolve that particular division, if you like, and go more to a public focus in the big box sites we have now. And as a dealer, they no longer had any tools in the box that I wanted or I could use. And so I gravitated my business across to Mannheim, who had done their best to, in fact, they absorbed a lot of ex-Turners dealers team, and still to this day speak the language when it comes to the things that I need as a dealer for my trading, whether it's buying or selling. Now, that doesn't suit everyone around the country, and I'm sure individual branches have different ways of looking at things. But here in Auckland, I think the focus is very much Turners of the retail arm of the trade, and Mannheim is still pitching into that, effectively a wholesale market. So the toolbox is yet to be disclosed from the Turners perspective for a dealer.
Yeah. Right, let's move on to auctions of a different kind. Flat. I can listen to a page there, as always. Here we go. Flat year for Trade Me owner ahead of public float, ? Titan Parent New Zealand, the creatively named local holding company for Trade Me, has reported revenues of $370 million to June 2024, up from $358 million in the previous trading period. So says the Herald, which cited the accounts filed by Titan Parent to the company's office. The Herald has provided the opinion that Trade Me own a British private equity firm, Apex, has loaded it with considerable debt, and that Gospy business columnists believe the online marketplace is being prepared for a public listing on the NZX. According to the Herald, Titan Parent reported statutory profits of $9.1 million to the company's office. However, this was bolstered by $18.4 million in an effective portion of changes of cash flow hedges. Accounting. Short answer, market is slow. Now, will Apex sell Trade Me? Well, that has been discussed and floated, for a number of years. I can't see it happening right now because I think the market is down. Trade Me's profit, or at least turnover, is probably down through arguably little fault of its own. Everyone's struggling at the moment. And surely for a float, they want to wait for a period where the company's performing. Though, I guess in the context, maybe it's performing very well in the context of other investment opportunities out there. But I can't see it happening right now. Maybe late next year once the market turns.
As a dealer, they have more of our money now than they did this time last year. I can tell you that right now for a fact. So,
they have. I mean, look, they have just offered a whole pile of enhancements. Would that be the term? To dealers, which I think is them acknowledging that the market perhaps hasn't played that well this year.
All I'm going to say is watch this space.
I think you're right, Richard.
Have their recent offers to dealers been well accepted, and is Trade Me still performing for dealers, Graham?
In a nutshell, kind of flat, but yes. So whichever way you look at it, despite the new entrants to the marketplace and revitalisation in competitors, Trade Me is without still it's still a dominant player for traders. It's be very difficult to operate a business that has any online presence without Trade Me as your preeminent listing service. And yes, there's been some different packages. I don't know, I'd call them enhancements. There's been some different packages, different ways of structuring things, and it'll work for some people and it won't work for others. And I think there's always a bit of difficulty where people are that set in their way or that so angry about the events that they saw taking place earlier on this year, whether they were right or wrong, that they won't see an opportunity now if it's been presented to them by Trade Me because they're just too angry to see it. But it's still the number one marketing source as an industry. You can't get past it. And I think Trade Me obviously must know that. But is this a good time to be looking at divesting the company and listing? No, you're right. It needs probably a good year's worth of trading to see those numbers stabilize a wee bit and inevitably the business come back.
Yep. Now, we're going to move on to a story which is normally would be down the back of what we're doing, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because it's just been rating its tits off online lately. And that's Jaguar's rebrand. Graham, is it terrible?
Yes, it is. And
look,
I've
David,
looked at this from different angles.
David, is it terrible?
No.
Graham, you're wrong. David, you're right.
In your opinion?
Well, it is a matter of opinion. It is a matter of opinion, but that's what marketing is all about. And I think Jaguar have been quite astute. So there's some really interesting things here, a mix of lowercase and uppercase letters, the choice of the font, the simplicity of it. When you're going to rebrand, you have to have it make a talking point in some way. Because it's all about brand recognition. And because Jaguar is going down a new route in terms of electrification, that logo fits the electrification. And whether we like it or not, it's kind of got people talking. And that's exactly what brand identification is all about from a marketing perspective.
This branding exercise has very little to do with the ultimate brand. this branding exercise, and I'll put in the comments on LinkedIn for this video a link to a video from Spectator TV from the UK. There's a guy there that does work with him. He's the vice chair of Ogilvy, the big advertising agency, and he runs through it and he explains how well this has been perceived badly. It's actually kind of the point, and that the Jaguar basically is leaving their old customers behind. And they need to, because this is kind of the culmination of what was set up when Ford had Jaguar 20 odd years ago, where they started chasing the mass market. And it has been an utter failure to an extent ever since. And what they're doing now is rebranding the car as, well, they're not rebranding the car, they're breaking away from those buyers and they're going to start again. And Jaguar is moving up range. They're going to essentially compete with Bentley, as opposed to trying to be a BMW or that. Their next car coming out from this, the teaser images coming through, looks for all purposes looking like it's going to more closely compete with the Rolls-Royce Spectre than anything else. And they wanted a fresh break. And the point that they made, the point this chap from Ogilvy made, was that it had nothing to do with the campaign. This is just him giving his opinion. Was that the people complaining about this and the people who perhaps were passionate about that old Jaguar brand weren't buying the cars anyway. And particularly there is an element of, let's just jump on the blame this as being woke kind of thing, when it was just really a brand thing just to move things forward. And it's done what it's supposed to. You're right, David. It's done what it's supposed to do. Yeah.
It was a really good comment that I read, and I take all your opinions on board, and we're probably all 50% right about what we're thinking here. There's an interesting comment that I saw from, and it might be in the same chap, I don't think it was the Spectator, but it was one of the prestigious British organs of motoring journalists, when he said that the core issue here is the rebrand didn't solve Jaguar's primary issue, which is that the cars just actually weren't that good. And they haven't been that good for it. And this is just opinion. Jaguar, New Zealand, just what I've heard, saying that the vehicles themselves are the issue, not the company itself, but the vehicles themselves. And so the issue wasn't that Jaguar had this fantastic product range and loyal buyers. It was they got the vehicles themselves weren't quite good enough to compete, irrespective of whether the buyers were loyal Jaguar fans or not. If the rebrand addressed the issue of the quality and the models themselves would be one thing, but it's failing at this stage, failing to do that until we see what this new rebranded Jaguar looks like. But
well, you need to think of the rebrand, the context then at the moment of that Jaguar's basically building no cars at the moment.
Well, no, it's
next
not.
year, Jaguar New Zealand will have no cars for an extended period of time. To an extent, they're dumping what they're doing and moving in an entirely new direction. That's the reality, and they need a break.
I'll say two things. Firstly, personally, I think the rebrand looks quirky and it's not quite to my liking. But looking at it professionally and from a marketing perspective and where Jaguar have come from and where they intend to head to, you tend to do a rebrand when you want to put a bookend on one phase of your product and open another bookend when you're starting to move into a new range. And so they've been looking at going electrified only. But when you pick up on and say, well, actually the marketing perspective for the last 10 to 15, maybe 20 years is their vehicles have been kind of okay, but, not great. It's in some people's opinion. And you want to put that behind. You go for quite a big change in your brand as a way of saying that's the end. We're about to go from being a caterpillar to a butterfly. That's what that branding is all about, in my view, in my opinion. So I think they've been quite clever about it. And when you do rebrand, if you can get people talking about it and build up an anticipation, then you're kind of along. That's a good kickstart to the journey that you're beginning to go on. Of course, Graham, you were right too, that if you're going to do this, then your product you bring out it has to measure up to what that anticipation you're now building up to.
Yeah. The interesting comment made by this guy from Ogilvy was that Jaguar has a Church of England problem. That's maybe something that people who've lived in England would more understand than anyone back in New Zealand. It's a Church of England problem. Everyone loves the Church of England in England, but no one wants to go to church on a Sunday. No one wants to go. They love it. They want the churches to be there. They want the chance to go to a wedding at a Church of England church and do all the rigmarole at some point, but no one wants to belong to them. It's the same with Jaguar. Everyone loves Jaguar. Everyone thinks they know the Jaguar brand, but no one's going to go and buy one. So,
they just hire it for weddings and funerals.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what National Trust is for, isn't it?
Yes.
I do hope, for Jaguar's sake, and I just say this, I just hope for their sake, because we now have ad people projecting what we're going to be buying in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I just hope for Jaguar's sake that the people that have put this campaign together read the market well enough to get it right. Because if they don't, if there's circumstantial change, if we see a backlash against what is being talked about online as being, woke culture, and we see an unwinding of that over the next couple of 3 years, and Jaguar emerged like this butterfly into a marketplace that's suddenly not quite as good a prospect as they thought it was, there ain't no going back.
Explain to me where the hell woke culture came into this advertising campaign.
You've seen the ads?
I have, but that's just avant-garde fashion. That's been around since the frickin' 90s and doing that kind of stuff. There's nothing new or woke in that. There's so many people, and I'm sorry, particularly from the right, sides of the right, and you look, it was like GBN in the UK, the big freaking Fox News type thing over there that was really pushing this angle, Nigel Farage, that kind of stuff, that are desperate to find anything to call woke. And particularly now that you've got Trump in office in America, so a lot of the stuff on the other side will start to disappear, it'll all quieten down. Now that they've got where they need to get, there's going to be people in some of these markets just desperately chasing anything as being woke. If you go and see some politician in a pink shirt, they're going to be called woke. You just watch over the next thing. There are people desperate in broadcasting and in political groups to find anything they can to label with that. And it's becoming bullshit.
Yeah, and it's a bit like the fake news. Every time you disagree with the news, you just say fake news. It's a label that I think people need to use carefully. I will say, in my nearly 11 years at the Motor Industry Association, and as you know, they gave me a vehicle every 3 months. One of those vehicles was the Jaguar sedan with the V6 diesel motor in it. It was one when I went through all the rotation and people said, which cars did I prefer? That was one in my top 5. It was a very nice vehicle. It performed very well, had great fuel economy. It was a luxury vehicle in terms of the Mercs and the Beamers. It was in that sort of grouping. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And if I'd had the money at the time, I would have been tempted to buy it.
They've made some beautiful cars. When I was but a young journalist, I borrowed a Jaguar XKR coupe to take my little sister to the ball, and that thing was it was like driving a Spitfire on the road. It was awesome. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to get called woke now for saying that wasn't woke. So
I'm going to get labelled as an anti-wokester. I'm not. I'm parroting what we're seeing, this just onrush of media coming to us about what's going on and being said around the world. And that's effectively the two arguments that are around at the pro and the con. That's what it's being pictured as. So you can pick a side accordingly and pick up which bits you like and which bits you don't like. But bottom line is, it's done. It ain't going back in the bottle now. And we need to sit tight and wait till 2026. Is it, Richard? When's the projected unveiling? Is it mid-26?
Well, they've shown a teaser. They've shown the rear haunches of their new electric coupe, I think. Looks pretty cool to me. But the reason why I brought up the story today is just, the whole ad campaign's a few days old now. But Jaguar boss says he wants a smaller, culturally aligned UK dealer network. And before the woke guys jump out, no, he's not talking about having DEI dealers, you dumbass. Jaguar managing director Rawdon Glover says because that's what GBN News will take it as. Got to watch your wording. Jaguar Managing Director Rawdon Glover says the newly shrunken UK dealership network will comprise partners in the right location who are culturally aligned with the reinvented all-electric luxury brand. Glover's comments were reported by car dealer James Baggett, who attended the re-imaging launch, which confirmed the Jaguar dealer network would be reduced from 80 to around 20 sites. So you can see they are going really upmarket. That would probably match about the number of Bentley dealers in the UK. We've chosen to have these points based on geography. Those were the most, if we looked at the customer base that we're going to offer, where the most wealth was, Glover says. So what they're saying, culturally by that, they're saying we're going to the rich areas, not we're going to go and appoint DEI dealers, we're going to the rich areas. According to Glover, the next generation architecture for remaining dealers will see them transform to cope with the house of brands from JLR, which now includes Range Rover, Defender, Discovery, and Jaguar. He says this would be relatively modest investments for its partners, and there's more about how the brands are portrayed inside. We think they're going to be excited about the Jaguar prospects, and we think they're going to be able to give an elevated level of service. According to Glover, Jaguar will also run a brand store in London that is similar in look and feel to high luxury boutique fashion stores. They are culturally not going to be mass market dealers, is the point.
I chuckled when I read that because I interpreted the cultural as the more polite way of saying, we're just going to be upper class. We're not going to deal with the plebs.
They're going to be
Arthur
tops.
Day would be rolling in his grave right about now, wouldn't he? Arthur, he would just be...
So it's a really interesting move, and Graham, the genie is out of the bottle, and so it says I said several times this morning, you got to, when you move your brand like this, it's incumbent to then produce the product to match the expectations. So we'll wait and see what happens.
Yes. Now, let's run through the rest of this quickly because we've spent half the day on two stories, which is good. I love it. I love these chats.
Good stories.
Right.
Good stories.
Passenger vehicle imports down at 1.8 billion year on year. Imports of vehicles, parts, and accessories in New Zealand fell 2.95 billion to 8.9 billion in the year to October 2024 compared to the same period last year, according to Stats NZ. Leading the passenger fall were passenger motor vehicles down 1.8 billion, vehicles for the transport of goods down 469 million, and tractors down 349 million. The only category to rise was diesel cars between 1.5 and 2.5 litres, up 120 million. I'm guessing that means utes, or vans actually. Yeah, that's a lot.
No shit, sure.
That is a lot.
I mean,
that's a metric ton.
Yep, it is.
Well,
And we all know it. You know what? If we don't know it, we've all been under a rock for the last 12 months, and you certainly don't watch this show, and you don't look at any media whatsoever, because we all know it, we all feel it. It's probably symptomatic of the entire economy, to be honest with you. In fact, we'll almost be surprised that it's not a larger figure than that, to be fair.
Yeah,
and to be honest, we all talked about this short, sharp recession, and I kind of feel like we're now getting into the slightly too long and slightly too sharp element. And as much as I appreciate what the government's doing in regards to, getting a lot of the fat out of the system and all that kind of stuff, we're a year and a bit in now, and they're still announcing significant plans for government layoffs. I kind of feel like they need to be softening the blow a little bit about now, because those jobs probably could go, and the actual macro effect of those job losses might not be the worst thing in the world. The impact that the signals that's sending to the market and the broader economy is starting to really bite. So,
this brings quantification in numbers to what we've all known for a little while. The numbers, Graham, you say you're surprised they're not larger. Well, it is significant, though, because the moment you start taking value out of a market, all sorts of things happen and change, as you know. So I wasn't surprised to see these numbers. I thought they were quite significant, but it could have been worse. It's an engineered recession that we have, and it is dragging on. And we just had 50 basis points reduction again.
Is it time they did more, though? Is it time they perhaps just stop the cuts, ease the cuts a little bit, and ease the flow of money a little bit?
I think you'll find that we won't see a 0.5 early next year. I think they will just see how this goes. It's kind of interesting. The housing market's still flat, so the cuts are sort of big there. It's a good time to buy a house. In fact, I spent this last week, well, actually last several weeks, helping my son Liam get his first house. So he finally got an offer accepted this week. He's doing his due diligence now. And it's really interesting, just as I've delved into the housing market again, it feels like it's the bottom. People are not prepared to go any lower. And with the interest rates cuts coming in, people are now starting to get out and starting to have a look and starting to tease into perhaps making those big ticket purchases again. And if we see an uplift in housing, then I would expect to see an uplift in new vehicle sales, which is still really flat.
I think the problem is, just this overall confidence. We're just retail's in the toilet, vehicle sales are in the toilet. If we have a bad retail Christmas, which we're going to have, that's going to send some nasty shockwaves through the market as well. And my concern now is we're seeing some really significantly sized New Zealand businesses falter. And I feel like we're reaching the point of the recession now where we've cleaned up some of the mess, and all we're going to start doing is handing some of these markets to more cashed up overseas operators. And I think that's where we start to get into where the management perhaps needs to slow down a little. But I may be wrong.
Yeah. And one of the issues with handing these companies to cashed up overseas companies is that those overseas companies don't have a loyalty to New Zealand. You run the risk of stripping the assets and all that sort of stuff happening. So I think you're right, Richard. Something has to happen in terms of the economy needs to start growing again. How the government can engineer that is
stop announcing mass government layoffs would be the help. I honestly believe we need to cut the public service. No issue there. But I kind of feel like it needs to be that we need to move to a point where it's in a more managed process rather than just.
We could try some quantitative easing. I hear that works quite well. Asking for a friend,
Well, I think part of the issue, Graham, is that the day of reckoning of previous quantitative easing is upon us, and that's why we are.
You think?
Yeah, I think.
Yep.
And to be fair, I don't want to labour on this. We're not an economic predicting show, but I think a lot of this too, particularly around the likes of the Kinleith Pulp and Paper, the timber mills down in Mowakuni. It's really unfortunate timing. Some of the issues around those closures are not necessarily related to the state of our economy, but there are a lot of external factors, particularly the timber market, which is in the proverbial toilet globally right now. But they all do get sheeted back to our economy here. And we talk about our economy in a downturn, and it all gets pushed into the same bucket. And the economy's it's in the basket. It's badly managed. They need to bring the rates down faster. There are other external factors going on as well, but it's just unfortunate that the timing of everything happening at once really sucks.
And
the pulp and paper stuff, a lot of it also comes down to the power market, and there's some real structural issues there that need to be fixed as well. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. Now, former Port of Auckland boss found guilty after workplace death. Former Ports of Auckland Chief Executive Tony Gibson has been found guilty on a health and safety charge in relation to the death of a stevedore. Gibson was found guilty under the Health and Safety Work Act 2015 by Judge Steve Bonner in an Auckland District Court decision on November 27, 6 months after the trial ended. It follows the August 2020 death of Pala'amo Kalati, who was crushed when a container was dropped during a lifting operation. Regulatory Compliance Agency Maritime New Zealand filed two health and safety charges against Gibson. Judge Bonner found in favour of Maritime NZ on the charge under the Section 44 that alleged Gibson failed to comply with his health and safety duties, exposing stevedores to a risk of death or serious injury, particularly around crane operations and exclusion zones. Now, we won't go too far into detail on this because it's a very, very complicated case, and nor do I think it's entirely over yet. But we will keep a watching brief on this, in part because Tony Gibson is, of course, now the Chief Executive and Director of Vehicle Inspection New Zealand. So, yeah, it's an interesting one there, and I think people should go and read that case on AutoTalk, if not for the fact that it has some relevance to the trade, but the fact that the new rules that were brought in a couple of years ago mean that you now are criminally responsible for health and safety within your workplace, more so within you were in the past, and something that's very important to keep an eye on, I think.
Yeah, it's very relevant to our trade, to the bigger aspects of our industry. It's very relevant.
As you might recall, I worked with Maritime New Zealand for 9.5 years, and under the legislation that they operate, they were moving responsibility, or the legislation permitted and intended to have a look at responsibility, not just for the people who are involved in an incident, but the management above it, in terms of what the policies that they had, and how effective they were at identifying and addressing risks. So the chain of responsibility is a fairly complicated piece of law, and it is it has to be demonstrated beyond all reasonable doubt. So this case is testing that. And I think you're right, Richard. We might not have seen the end of it, but it's a tragic situation. And I'm just going to sort of leave it at that in terms of health and safety responsibility is a system-wide responsibility. And the further you are up in management, the more you actually need to take notice of how things are operating on the ground. You can't just say it's them and not us.
Yeah. Right, on to the next story. Industry pays tribute to inaugural VIN's general manager. VIA is paying tribute to Jared Edward George Lawrence, who has died in his 81st year. The professional body of the automotive used vehicle sector says Lawrence was VIN's inaugural general manager. He led the company from its startup in the early 1990s until his retirement in November 2003. He transformed VIN's from a startup focused on entry certification to a company that provided a range of services in addition to entry certification, including WAF, COF, A&B, and public counter services for the NZTA. VIA says Lawrence was well liked by his staff, who he treated as family, with many Friday afternoon barbecues held at the various spaces around the country. Did you ever deal with Gerald Graham?
No. He's before my time of being I suppose, involved at the pointy end of the industry. 2003, we were going gangbusters, but we had no particular need to have interaction at that stage with certainly with VINs. We weren't a VINs customer at that point in time. So, no. By the time I could get involved at that stage, IMVIA, Gerald had already been retired. However, there's a lot of references to him back in the trade at that stage too. So clearly his legacy, some 3 or 4 years on since his retirement, was quite considerable, because there's a lot of references to Gerald and what he'd done and what he had portrayed and the people he knew and the relationships he had. So, and they were all good. They were all good references. So I suppose that's I sometimes think, you want to hear that thing. In talking in terms of eulogies, it's always nicest to hear the eulogy while you're still alive to hear it.
Yes.
I think that was the case.
Heartland Group reports a drop in motor vehicle finance, which aligns with what we were talking about earlier. Heartland Group is reporting a 2.5% year-on-year decline in its motor finance portfolio for the 4 months to October 31. In a market update, the NZX listed financial services firm says the volatility experienced during the financial year ended June 30 has continued for the year to date. Heartland continues to carefully manage credit quality and expects growth to return during the second half of financial year 2025 as interest rates reduce and credit demand strengthens. Now, this market this year, I guess, has been a bit of a twist of the knife for the finance companies, in that finally the mortgage rates went up and their house prices didn't grow so much. So they got a bit of a competitive edge back against the banks and chucking it on the mortgage, as they say. And then the market died.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a lot worse for those finance companies, because they're lending on cars, whereas the banks aren't really. I guess a bit of a interesting time for them. Also interesting, though, that they are suggesting that they believe it'll come back next year. For a listed company to predict something, they've put a lot of effort into predicting that. And if they're banking on it coming back, then clearly
Did you notice that
they had...
the second half of that sent chills down my spine? The second half of 2025, and so survive to 25. I was just sitting there thinking about that, thinking if they're not talking about from the second half of 25 for a recovery, I mean, a lot of our marketplace is
no. So they're So that's the second half of financial year 2025, which is to the end of June.
Yeah.
All right. I'll take that under advisement. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Not calendar year 2025. But you are right. I mean, it's not going to be any time in the first half of the year. Right. We'll flick through a couple quickly here because we are knocking on 11 o'clock. Reserve Bank cuts OCR to 4.25%. We said that before. Hopefully that will have a bit of a nudge. Eagers Automotive celebrates leadership program graduates. So Eagers Automotive North Harbour dealer principal Derek Vandenberg is celebrating the graduation of his 6 team members from the company's 2024 Emerging and Advancing Leadership Program. Good on them. Any professional development is good for this market. JSE targets tradies with affordable high-spec T9 4x4 ute. So they've launched their ute into the market, another Chinese ute into the market, and that is $49,990. My back of a chip packet assessment of that vehicle is not as adventurous or ambitious as some of the Chinese utes coming into the market, but quite a solidly built, simple platform and setup that they've got there. So they haven't gone for the glamour what the new Great Walls have, but I also think this is fundamentally a very strong trade-focused ute, and they did that pretty much with a trade breakfast-style launch as well. I don't know what you think of the look of that ute, Graham. You're the ute man around here. Well, so you, Dave.
I was looking at this actually just yesterday online, and I thought it's actually not a bad package. And what I like about it is just what you've said. They haven't over-egged it. I know that's the tradie breakfast. It's a bad analogy. They haven't overdone it. It's reasonably simple. The design is not unpleasant. It's not full of... Now, a lot of the current designs we're seeing, particularly in the Chinese ute sector, I think they've just... It's like, designers, put your pens down now. Stop it. JAC appear to have reined the designers in and said, you know what this thing is set to do? It's going to tow a concrete mixer, and it's going to have tradies inside it, and it's going to get kicked around dusty building sites. Do bear that in mind. 5-star
safety, which some of the Chinese brands didn't have with their first utes. So, and it's got the feature that I think it will appeal a lot to tradies. It has a hot and cool box, so you can either have cold drinks or a hot pie in your ute. Get in your ute in the morning, chuck a pie in from the fridge at home, and by the time you get to morning tea, it'll be piping hot.
And then flick the switch and put a can of Coca-Cola in.
Yeah, I am. My take on this, Richard, was I was reading the information on it from a range of sources, and I kept thinking to myself, it's not overcooked, it's not flashy. It sort of reminded me when I look at your Toyotas and your Fords tend to have, they've got lots of flashy bits and some of them more upmarket. It's more like an Isuzu. So it's like the Isuzu equivalent of the Chinese brand. It's more mainstream, more dependable. And I do like the looks of it. I think it's quite an interesting vehicle, and that's a fabulous introductory price.
So they're going to try and get sales off the bar and Triton, aren't they?
Yeah,
absolutely. I actually think it interesting you say that is if you look at the overall makeup of it and packaging and drivetrain and that, it's actually not too. I think it's one of the closest of the vehicles in the market now to probably the old Colorado. I feel packaging wise. Yeah. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. I'm going to drive it soon, but maybe we'll send it to you, Graham. GM launches Cadillac F1 team and engine. General Motors and TWG Global have agreed in principle with Formula One to bring a Cadillac team to the series in 2026. GM is also launching an F1 power unit that will allow the Cadillac Formula One team to become a full works team building cars and engines by the end of the decade. How that works with them returning to an electric vehicle brand, not sure, but it's a hybrid.
Perhaps they need to do a bit of a Jaguar-esque rebrand.
I read this and thought, gosh, they must have more money than they're telling us about, because it's expensive to be in an F1 team.
Well, I think simply their fee to pay off the other teams to get in there is $500 million. But then now, even the worst F1 teams are profitable now because the sport's so big. So
yeah, that's true.
Who knows? Maybe it'll take care of themselves. And lastly, Mazda drops a CX-60 PHEV variant in favor of a hybrid, reflecting the changing market demand, and I suspect the change in lack of subsidies. Mazda New Zealand is phasing out the 74,990 CX-60 Touring PHEV to introduce the new 69,990 CX-60 SP Hybrid as the latest entry point model for the new year. So interesting one there to see a PHEV being dropped in favour of a hybrid. There, I'm sure that has says something about where the market's going with things. But yeah, interesting one there. Good looking car.
If we can see it, it's not on screen.
Pardon?
I say if we could see it because it wasn't on screen. But there you go. I think we all know what it looks like.
There you go.
No, it's loading.
They've got four SUVs, or 6 SUVs now. They all look pretty much the same. 4 of them look exactly the same, which is a good thing. Brand consistency. Now, but to close off, I'm going to dig back to our discussion of the Jaguar story, and I'm going to quote Will Ferrell from Blades of Glory. It's also this quote's in a Kanye West Jay-Z song. No one knows what it means, but it's provocative. Does that summarize the Jaguar issue?
Yeah, that's probably actually a really good way of looking at it. And what we'll do, we'll bottle this show. We're going to package it up. We're going to put it in the little archives. And then midway through 26, we're going to pull it back out the shelf and dust it off and see who was right.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Could be a copywriting on it, Richard. Could be a copywriting on it.
Yes, exactly. Great. Well, thank you very much for listening to another.
Show, it's a bit like this talk show, isn't it, Richard?
Yes. None of us know what we're talking about, but we're provocative. Anyway, that's it for this week. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll catch you again next week. Yeah, I can do next week. Maybe the week after might be a bit of an issue because I'll be in China for the AutoTalk Weekly Wrap. Catch everyone later.